Some local journalists in Boston are coming out with a different way to produce and share the news. Plans call for launching the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, or BINJ, in the fall. Our guest is one of the leaders in the project, who's also the news and features editor at DigBoston. We'd like to welcome Chris Faraone. Thank you very much for being with us, Chris.
Thank you so much.
First of all, we're at a time when there is so much journalism, quality, I don't know.
Right.
But you're trying to provide more. It's not an easy sell, is it? Here?
Well, I mean, it depends. It's been an easy sell to a lot of the people we want to collaborate with. In that, yeah, there is a lot of journalism. We are looking to do some of the deeper, more involved, and we're fortunate. We want to take a step back and do bigger projects around issues that, unfortunately, a lot of reporters have to cover every day, and we want to, really look at the bigger picture and see what's going on.
What do you see this being for the audience, first of all? What can they get that they can't get from, whether it's community papers, DigBoston, or the legacy journalism outlets?
Oh, yeah. Well, I used to be at the Boston Phoenix, and I'm now the editor of DigBoston. And at the Dig, we do one of those like big features. We call it long form sometimes, project-based. Some of these stories that take a reporter, maybe a team, maybe there's also an editor and a data scientist, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 8 months. There are Freedom of Information Act requests. There are multiple interviews, some stories up to 20, 30 interviews. So the shoe leather journalism. And for the readers, these are the ways, this is how they find out about, serious issues in their community, systemic things, not just things that are happening day to day. Some of the things we're looking at, and I could go on forever, but some of the larger issues around Alston infrastructure and Harvard, as opposed to just there was this one community meeting. Well, let's take a look back at the last 30 years, because that's actually very important as to how we got where we are. So some of these things are covered. We're looking at them in a bigger perspective.
Well, for example, we'll talk about the potential for right now in some parts of the city, gentrification's a big issue, and we're trying to make these distinctions. How do you regulate this? What do you do with investor owners? What happens to the other owners? What about the tenants? And I guess you need something more than just a day-by-day kind of coverage.
Absolutely. So one of the ways we'll be doing this is you can consider a BINJ an incubator. So we'll be putting together a team. So one team we're putting together right now is to take a look at where all the liquor licenses should be, where they are. A lot were freed up last year so that neighborhoods and communities that don't have a lot of nightlife options might have them, but they're not really ending up there. So we're going to take a bigger look at that. And also, of course, we all know there have been issues with politicians, in the past with trying to free these licenses up. We're going to look at the longer version of that story. As far as how the community partners play in, well, we hope to have, places, different community outlets reporting on what's going on in that particular neighborhood. We're talking to Jamaica Plain Gazette about doing something about how they play out. Why do some liquor licenses end up on Center Street instead of Eggleston Square? So really taking it down. They called it hyperlocal. That was the catchphrase for a while. But real journalism, down on the ground. A lot of the stuff that you do right here on BNN.
You've also talked about translating work into other language. We have a big immigrant population, whether it's Spanish, Chinese. I guess you're thinking a little bit, at least, along those lines?
I have a meeting with somebody from El Planeta in the morning. And one of the things, it blows me away. I have friends who speak multiple languages, Chinese and Spanish. And sometimes we'll have a newspaper. We'll be out at a bar or a restaurant. And they'll say, show me what's going on in that story. And it'll be something that happened right around the corner from me. And this is a small news town. As reporters, we kind of like to think we know everything that's going on. We don't. So one of the projects that we'll be doing is actually, it's simpler. Not everything is Watergate. We're going to be taking, bits of, say, like a best of the Spanish-speaking press and translating that and facilitating that to run as syndication in an English-speaking outlet, and then vice versa, and kind of like bringing that full circle. So it's about networking a lot of these community outlets, community papers that on their own don't have a big voice together. And it's not just that they'll be running different parts of the same story. It's that all the social networking and all the social media that really builds around that. It's a way to really push some of these important stories up to where the papers of record, where the Boston Globe or where some of the bigger television stations are reporting them. Because right now, frankly, I don't believe that there are a lot of good mechanisms to get those stories up there.
I think you want more than just the kind of a reporter who could go to one community meeting and have something ready by the crack of dawn, and I think that's a big commitment of time. How are you going to incentivize that?
It is. So one thing, I've been looking into the nonprofit journalism world, and a lot of the things that the people who are setting up the foundations that are funding this thing, and they're trying to do all. They'll go into a city like Cleveland and start a brand new operation and blow $6 million, trying to get a lot of people full-time jobs. Look, I wish I could get every journalist in the city who deserves one a full-time job. Frankly, it's not where we are in the journalism space right now. We're just not. I'm trying to get people these $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 contracts that can pay their rent for several months. For a freelancer, that's the difference between what? That's the difference between eating and not sometimes, and that's the difference between doing long-form journalism and not. A lot of people will blog on their own time, but I promise you, and there's not a lot of freelance, there's a lot of freelancers, there's not a lot of armchair long-form reporters. People who, like you said, these take months sometimes, really looking at everything that's going on, hours, hundreds of hours, interview after interview, expenses, gas, mileage. It costs a lot. We don't, hopefully eventually we could have full-time people. In the interim, I want to keep people in the game and cultivate the next generation of people who can really do this, because there's not a lot of places doing that.
For all the splintering of the big media world outlook, I'm sure you have a sense that there is still some kind of prevailing mainstream narrative that you want to change or shake up. How are you going to do that?
I don't think that's about changing. I mean, the narrative is what it is. There will always be reporting on silly stories and chasing the same carrot. I think, though, that there are big stories, and as a reporter who has kicked a lot of those stories into the Boston Globe, and stories on surveillance, stories on prison abuses, I know that when there's enough noise at the lower levels, at the community, at the alternative, independent journalism levels, that those stories will get picked up. I know from experience. Like I said, not everything's the biggest story. We're reporting, one of the first things we're going to do is a smaller project, but we're looking at this gas pipeline that's coming into West Roxbury-Dedham area. I think that you've done something.
We have had some guests on the show.
You have, but come on. I mean, who else really has? So these are the kind of stories, if you're doing it, if we're doing it, if a couple more people are doing it, and there's more noise, well, that's something that I personally believe deserves a lot more coverage at the state level.
Another part of this, and I'm sure you're still developing it, is that you have some way where there's going to be some sharing of the product here, so that the impact will be multiplied too, won't it?
Right. So we are. There's going to be some more serviceability. If we do a big story on that pipeline, maybe you'll be able to find out the people who we interviewed. What are some further actions? Not necessarily pushing, but it could be on both sides of an issue. But where is the involvement? What is the action? What kind of steps can be taken to further? You want to get more educated, to know what's going on. In Dedham and Westwood tonight, there's a lot of people at a community meeting that don't often go to them. So when people are processing this information, we're going to try to help them see where they should go.
Well, speaking of meetings, you have a meetup.
We do.
Coming pretty soon, right?
We do, and this is the community place to talk about it. It's on, I think it's coming up in a week on July 1st, and it is 22 Warren Street at Future Boston Alliance. And the one whole thing about this is we want to really train a lot of journalists from the ground up. There'll be some experience there, experienced people, as well as some neophytes, and we hope people come down. It'll be mostly informational. All ages. There's no alcohol or anything like that. We're just going to be really explaining what the project is, kind of like I did today, and starting to get this information in. What are the stories that people want covered that they can't believe aren't covered more? We want to know.
Plus, they can follow on Twitter, right?
Of course, at Binge Reports.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Chris Faraone of DigBoston. Still to come, an event to help immigrants on the path to citizenship. But first, this message.